Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a B-movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Robot Jox today. So Robot Jox, I remember seeing this when I was very young and I saw the trailer of it, of another VHS tape that we were watching at some point, and I saw the trailer of Robot Jox and I was like, my jaw hit the floor and I thought, wow, that looks amazing. So I hadn't really seen anything like that before. And you know, at the time when I actually got around to seeing it that first time, I thought it was absolutely amazing. I loved it, like, you know, and that kind of got me into sort of the Transformers sort of things as well. So, Robot Jox. I've just watched it obviously again for this review, and I'll tell you a bit about the plot. Now, I will say this this is going to be a fairly spoiler-heavy review because I want to talk specifically about the very end of this film. Now, chances are you've probably seen this, to be honest with you, obviously, if you've watched this review, but just in case you haven't, but please bear that in mind. So, really, this is a sort of a future of sci-fi film, obviously, and it takes place a number of years after World War III, and World War III has pretty much devastated the planet. Instead of going to war, what the world's populace decide to do is to settle any disputes. Rather than having wars, they actually have almost like sort of combat matches, like gladiatorial combat matches with huge sort of like mecha robots. Now, why they couldn't have them with, say, boxers, for example, is another matter. But there you go. You know, obviously there wouldn't be a film then, really. But anyway, they have them with these giant mech robots, and they have basically a pilot inside, and disputes are settled that way. For example, over sort of turf and things like that. And the story really focuses on a kind of American pilot, I guess. I mean, we're not sure exactly how the side is divvied up, but basically we have what seems to be the Americans and the Soviets, and obviously every other country I wouldn't really know where they sort of fall into, to be honest with you, because it sounds like there's more or less just sort of two sort of sides of this conflict, and every country is either on one side or the other. But anyway, the main hero, if you like, is a guy called Achilles, and that's his kind of pilot name, if you like. And pilots basically have 10 matches until they're sort of ultimately allowed to leave the sort of service. And this guy's on his sort of last match, so to speak. And he's the kind of like their sort of best pilot, if you like. And the sort of Soviets' best pilot is this guy called Alexander, and he's sort of their champion, who's a little bit more sort of brutal than he needs to be. Killing sort of pilots when they've surrendered and things like that. Now, that the actual matches are actually refereed by a kind of, like I'd assume to be obviously neutral sort of referee committee or what have you. And ultimately, the Achilles and Alexander have a match, and something goes wrong, and a load of spectators end up getting killed, and the match is declared a draw. And the kind of they want a rematch ultimately, but Achilles, having this being his 10th match, decides that that's it, he wants it done, and he's kind of a little bit upset, obviously, about all these sort of spectators getting killed, and this kind of turns the public against him to some degree. Now, the kind of the US sort of government, or this kind of coalition or whatever, they've kind of been producing genetically engineered pilots, and they kind of wanting to train them to be the next sort of level of Robot Jox pilots, and we're told the Soviets are doing the same thing. So really, the middle of this film is more or less the sort of story of the training of these these kind of like test tube babies almost, and in one particular female one who's the only female sort of pilot, and she kind of has a little bit of a romantic tinge with Achilles. And that's the kind of really the kind of the main of the bulk of the middle of this film. There's also a subplot about a possible spy. Now, I think they telegraphed that a little bit early on, in my opinion, about who that potentially is. So that's a bit of that was not really a twist when it actually happened, because they kind of telegraphed it a little bit early, to be honest with you. And that really is the main bulk of this film. Ultimately, is the training of these recruits, and the kind of the conspiracy plot about who this kind of like the inside source is, who's ultimately selling out all these the weapon secrets of the Robot Jox to the other side. And then we have our final fight, and it's sort of spectacular low budget glory. And it's all good. There's lots of robot action. They're very much like Transformers. They sort of transform into spaceships and tanks and different things and fight in various ways, hand to hand, long range and things like that. So, you know, for the budget, it's all very exciting. So that's pretty much the plot ultimately. So, okay, so what are the negatives about this plot? Now, this might seem only harsh, but I do like this film first and foremost. So I will say that. I think when you look back at this film, you kind of think, oh yeah, it's really great. It's about giant robots. But what you don't remember is the robot fighting is probably only you know, a small part of this film, probably around a quarter, or if that, of the actual film. The bulk of the plot is this sort of conspiracy plot, and I don't think it's a particularly interesting plot, to be honest with you. This kind of the actual human side of it, and I don't think the characters are particularly interesting either. I don't think they're necessarily, you know, bad characters as such, but they're just not very particularly interesting. I don't find their characters all of that. I'm not all that invested in their characters, for example. I wouldn't say it's bad, but just not fantastic. And it's relatively, like I said, that the plot is sort of telegraphed a little bit too early, so it's a little bit basic, I think, in regards to in a storytelling perspective. You know, now I will say this: I actually think the dialogue is fairly good in it, and it's, you know, it's acted in a way that I don't think is particularly cliche. I think they actually give all right performances for you know, for a fairly low budget film. I actually think some of the ideas here and some of the things they say, the dialogue, pretty good. And it's just maybe the script, I think, maybe could have been a little bit more interesting. Now, one thing I will say with this film, again, this is an older film now, so the effects haven't aged particularly well. So whether you like this film, it's going to be dependent if you're one of those people who kind of goes, oh, they're crappy effects, or you just accept the fact that obviously this was made, you know, in a time, you know, when the effects were, it's basically stop motion for all the robot fights, and it's obviously a fairly low budget film to begin with anyway. So you kind of, you know, it's difficult to really criticise. I personally think this film for the effects. Yes, they don't look very good these days, and they do look, you know, quite rubbery and things like that. But for the time, they were quite acceptable for the budget. There you go. That's going to be a matter of taste rather than one thing or the other. I think the actual fight scenes themselves, I mean, these are big, like, you know, big hunking robots, so they kind of move fairly slowly. Maybe not. I mean, I thought. I mean, I was entertained with them. I think some people may find the combat a little bit sort of slow sometimes, but you know, I quite liked it. But what I did like, some of the little details they had. For example, one they go into space and they sort of fight almost spaceships, and they're kind of shooting each other, and there's explosions and stuff. But we don't hear any sound, which I think is because a lot of these films you'll hear like explosions in space, and that doesn't happen. But this maybe the little things like that I thought were quite good. Now I want to talk about the end. So the end of this film, you have the kind of the final fight between Alexander and Achilles. Now the governments have already stopped the match because the Russian side has kind of broken the rules, and the Americans have won. But they both want to continue fighting. They kind of have this personal grudge because they're ultimately the two sort of champions of each side. So they sort of end up sort of fighting anyway. And you know, we have this kind of quite extended sort of robot fight scenes, and ultimately the mechs are destroyed, and they end up getting out and fighting hand to hand. Now, what I did like about this film, it does something that you don't see all that often, especially in low budget films. At the end of the day, they decide to call it quits and make peace with each other. Now, that might seem like a bit of a lame cop-out ending, but you've got to think, how many times of these films have you sort of seen it where the kind of hero's hitting down the villain and he sort of says, you know, right, that's it, it's over, turns and walks away, and the kind of the bad guy sort of picks up something and tries to sort of stab him in the back, and the hero ends up sort of killing him in the end. Now, I couldn't remember this film the ending of this film before I just watched it, and I thought that was what was going to happen. And you know, I thought, wow, that's pretty good, because you don't see that often. That's not what normally happens in these films. You normally get this sort of confrontation, and the good guy normally tries to sort of, like, you know, smooth it over, make peace, but ends up having to kill the bad guy in the end anyway. But didn't they just end up sort of calling it quits and almost sort of shaking hands? And yes, it might be slightly anticlimactic, I grant you, But I thought it was really good. I mean, I think sometimes these, you kind of look at B-movie and you kind of don't give them enough credit sometimes. But this one, you know, I have to say, I don't think it's a perfect, but I do think it's had its flaws. But I think, they've put a lot into this film, and the makers of this film, I thought, were good filmmakers ultimately for the budget that they had. Maybe the script wasn't perfect, but that's really my only sort of issue with the sort of the middle section of this film. So I'm going to give this film a 7.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. If you're a B-movie fan and you haven't seen it, I strongly suggest you check it out. And this is one of my kind of more personal favourites of the B-movies that I've seen in the past. Anyway, obviously we've got Pacific Rim coming out in 2013, which kind of reminds me a little bit of this film. Obviously, I mean, I think I've seen comments on Pacific Rim posts, and a lot of people mention this film, and I think it's a fair comparison. But I also think it obviously owes a lot to the sort of the Japanese mecha things, and obviously maybe like Transformers as well to a degree. Anyway, let me know what you think. 7.5 out of 10. Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.